There are moments in life when we lose more than just objects. We lose faith. Harold Bennett, at 70, had given up on humanity. 3 decades as a police officer in Milwaukee had taught him that people were selfish, cruel, and self-interested. Then came the day he lost his wallet containing $3,000. All the savings he kept for the funeral he knew was approaching. He didn't expect to recover it. He didn't expect kindness. But 5 days later, the wallet was returned intact, accompanied by a letter from a complete stranger. And those simple words awakened something Harold thought was dead: hope. Harold Bennett woke up that Tuesday in November with the familiar feeling of emptiness that had been with him for years. His small house in Bayview, a working-class neighborhood of Milwaukee, was too quiet. Quiet since Dorothy died, 8 years ago. Quiet since his son, Michael, stopped calling 5 years ago. At 70, retired from the Milwaukee Police Department after 3 decades of service, Harold lived a mechanical routine. Black coffee at 6 in the morning. Walk to the Polish bakery on the corner. Newspaper. Television. Loneliness. But this day would be different. This day, Harold needed to go to the bank. Inside the worn leather wallet he carried in his back pocket were $3,000 in cash. All his savings. He had withdrawn it the week before for a somber purpose: to prepay for his own funeral. At 70, with a weak heart and no family who cared, Harold wanted to ensure he wouldn't be buried by the state as indigent. It was a matter of dignity, the only thing he had left. The walk to the bank was 15 minutes. Harold put on his heavy coat against the biting November cold and stepped outside. The streets of Milwaukee were full of hurried people, anonymous faces that barely looked at each other. Exactly how Harold liked it. Invisibility was comfortable. He stopped at the bakery, bought a coffee and a paczki, the filled Polish donut Dorothy loved. He sat on a bench on the sidewalk, watching the world go by with the cynicism of a man who had seen too much. As a police officer, Harold witnessed the worst of humanity: domestic violence, robberies, betrayals, gratuitous cruelty. Year after year, the job drained his faith in people until nothing was left but disbelief. He finished his coffee, threw the cup in the trash, and headed toward the bank. It was only when he reached the door that he reached for his back pocket and felt the emptiness. The wallet wasn't there. Harold's heart raced. He checked every pocket frantically. Coat, pants, shirt. Nothing. The wallet was gone. $3,000. All his savings. Disappeared. Harold stood still on the sidewalk, feeling the world spin. It wasn't just the money. It was the final confirmation that the world was exactly what he always knew: cruel, unfair, and void of kindness. Someone had stolen his wallet, and he would never see it again. Harold retraced his steps in controlled panic. The bakery first. He rushed inside, interrupting the line of mourning customers. "My wallet," he told the clerk, a middle-aged Polish woman named Basia who had known him for years. "Did I leave it here? Please tell me someone found it." Basia shook her head sadly. "No one handed anything in, Mr. Bennett, but I will ask." She shouted something in Polish towards the kitchen. The answer came back negative. Harold felt his stomach sink. He went outside and checked the bench where he had sat. Nothing. He rummaged through the nearby trash. Nothing. He walked along the sidewalk staring at the ground, hoping against all logic to see the wallet lying somewhere. After an hour of fruitless searching, Harold gave up. He walked home with slumped shoulders, defeated. Of course, he wouldn't find it. Someone had taken it. Someone saw the wallet lying there or lifted it from his pocket when he was distracted. And now they were $3,000 richer. $3,000. Saved penny by penny from his modest retirement for 2 years. Gone in an instant of carelessness. Harold locked himself in his house and didn't leave for the next 3 days. He didn't answer the doorbell. He didn't pick up the phone. He just sat in his worn armchair, staring at the walls, letting the bitterness consume him completely. "I knew it," he muttered to himself. "I always knew. People are no good. They never were." Memories of decades as a police officer paraded through his mind. The husband who beat his wife to death over a burned dinner. The mother who locked her children in a basement for days. The young man who robbed and killed an old man for $20. Case after case of cruelty, selfishness, wickedness. And now this, his last illusion that maybe, just maybe, some decency still existed in the world, was utterly crushed. Whoever took his wallet saw the money and decided to keep it. Simple as that. No one would return $3,000. No one was that honest. That naivete died in Harold decades ago. On the fourth day, Harold finally dragged himself out of bed. He needed to eat something. He needed to keep living, though he didn't exactly know why. He went to the kitchen to make coffee when he heard something fall through the slot of the front door. Mail. Harold initially ignored it. Bills, advertisements, nothing important. But something made him look. Among the generic white envelopes, there was a small brown package with no return address. Harold picked up the package with trembling hands. It was heavy, familiar, with fingers that could barely tear the paper. He opened it. His wallet fell into his hands. Harold froze, unable to process what he saw. He opened the wallet with bated breath. The money was there. Every bill. $3,000 intact. His cards. His ID. Everything exactly as it was. Impossible. It was impossible. He turned the package over looking for an explanation. A folded piece of paper fell out. With hands shaking violently, Harold unfolded it and read, "Dear Mr. Bennett, I found your wallet on the ground near the bakery on Kinnickinnick Avenue on Tuesday morning. I saw you looking desperately, but when I tried to catch up to you, you had already left. It took me a few days to return it because I wanted to do it in person, but my work schedule is complicated, so I decided to drop it off at your house. The address was on your ID. I hope you don't mind. All the money is here. I didn't take anything. I know it might seem strange in a world where people usually disappoint, but not everyone is like that. Some of us still believe in doing the right thing, even when no one is watching. My grandfather was a police officer, like you. I saw your retired badge. He taught me that integrity is doing the right thing, especially when it's hard. Returning this wallet wasn't hard. It was just decent. I hope that whatever you were planning to do with this money is still possible. And I hope this restores, even if just a little bit, your faith that kindness still exists. Take care, Mr. Bennett. A friend you've never met, Marcus." Harold read the letter 3 times. Then 4. Tears he hadn't shed in years began to fall, staining the paper. His hand squeezed the wallet against his chest as sobs shook his body. Someone returned it. A complete stranger found $3,000 and returned all of it. Not only did they return it, but they wrote kind words. Words about kindness, integrity, doing the right thing. Harold couldn't believe it. It didn't fit his carefully constructed worldview built over decades. But the proof was in his hands. The wallet, the money, the letter. For the first time in years, Harold felt something other than bitterness. He felt shame. Shame for having given up so completely on humanity. Shame for having become so cynical that simple kindness seemed impossible. And along with the shame, something else began to grow. Something small but persistent, like a seed finding light after a long winter. Hope. Harold spent the rest of the day rereading Marcus's letter. Every word was studied, analyzed, absorbed. Some of us still believe in doing the right thing, even when no one is watching. That particular sentence echoed in his mind. When was the last time Harold did the right thing, when no one was watching? He couldn't remember. In the last decades, especially after Dorothy died, he had completely withdrawn. He stopped caring about neighbors, about the community, about anything beyond his own solitary survival. That night, Harold couldn't sleep. He lay looking at the ceiling, thinking about Marcus. Who was this man? Young? Old? What kind of person returns $3,000 without hesitation? Harold had seen people kill for less during his police career. For the first time in years, Harold felt genuine curiosity about another human being. He wanted to meet Marcus. He wanted to thank him personally. He wanted to understand how someone maintained that kind of kindness in such a harsh world. But there was no return address, no phone number, just a first name and a lesson in humanity. The next morning, Harold did something he hadn't done in a long time. He left the house with a purpose. He went to the Polish bakery, not just to buy coffee, but to actually talk. "Good morning, Basha," he said, and for the first time in years, he really looked at her. He noticed the kind wrinkles around her eyes, the tiredness of someone who works hard but still smiles. "Mr. Bennett, did you find your wallet?" Basha asked hopefully. "I found it. I mean, someone returned it. A man named Marcus. Do you know anyone with that name around here?" Basha thought carefully. "Marcus. There's a Marcus who works at the construction yard on Bay Street. Marcus Johnson. Good man, always polite. Could it be him?" Harold wrote down the name and location. Then he bought extra rolls and, on an impulse that surprised him, left a $20 tip. Basha protested, but Harold insisted. "For all the times I didn't," he said simply. The construction yard was a 15-minute walk. Harold arrived at noon, when the workers were on lunch break. There were half a dozen men sitting outside, eating sandwiches from lunchboxes. "Excuse me for interrupting," Harold said, feeling strangely nervous. "I'm looking for Marcus Johnson." An African-American man, around 40 years old, looked up. He was tall, with broad shoulders from working with his hands, but he had kind eyes and an easy smile. "That's me. Can I help you?" Harold held out his hand. "My name is Harold Bennett. You returned my wallet." Marcus's face lit up with recognition, but also a touch of embarrassment. "Oh, Mr. Bennett, you didn't have to look for me. I just did the right thing." "That's exactly why I came," Harold said, his voice thick with emotion. "Because you did the right thing. And I need to thank you. It wasn't just the money. It was everything." Marcus gestured to the space next to him on the bench. "Sit down." Harold sat, and for the first time in years, he truly talked to someone. Marcus told him about his grandfather, James Johnson, who was one of Milwaukee's first black police officers in the 1960s. He faced brutal racism, but never lost his integrity. "He used to say that the world is harsh enough," Marcus explained. "We don't need to make it worse. If we can make one small gesture of kindness, however small, we should do it." Harold listened, feeling shame grow. He had done the exact opposite. He used the world's harshness as an excuse to become harsh too. He let cynicism poison everything. "I was a police officer too," Harold said quietly. 30 years. And somewhere along the way, I forgot why I joined the force. I forgot that the job was to protect and serve, not just to see the worst in people. Marcus placed a hand on Harold's shoulder. "It's never too late to remember." Something broke inside Harold at that moment. Tears came, and he didn't try to hide them. "I wasted so much time," he admitted. "Years being bitter alone, convinced that no one is any good. And then you show up and prove I was wrong." "You're not alone in that, Mr. Bennett," Marcus said gently. "Many people lose faith, but faith can be recovered. Kindness can be relearned. It's never too late." Harold wiped his eyes and looked at the stranger who, in a matter of days, had turned his world upside down. "Marcus, that letter you wrote, it changed something in me, and I want to pay it forward. Not to you, necessarily, but to the world. I want to do what you did. I want to be the reason someone recovers hope." Marcus smiled widely. "Then you already understand, Mr. Bennett. Kindness isn't a debt to be paid back. It's a current to be passed on." Harold returned home that day transformed. The conversation with Marcus had planted a seed, and for the first time in decades, he felt the urge to nurture it. But how exactly do you pass kindness forward when you've spent years isolating yourself from a world? He started small. The next day, instead of just mechanically waving to his elderly neighbor, Mrs. Kowalski, Harold stopped and actually asked her how she was. He found out she had severe arthritis and could barely manage the steps to get her mail. "I can grab it for you," Harold offered. "Every day, if you like." Mrs. Kowalski was so surprised she was speechless for a moment. Harold had lived next door to her for 12 years, and they had never had a conversation longer than 3 words. "Would you do that?" she asked, her eyes shining with gratitude. "It would be my pleasure," Harold replied, and he found that it truly would be. Thus began the routine. Every day, Harold collected Mrs. Kowalski's mail. Sometimes he took the trash to the curb too. Small gestures that cost nothing but meant everything to her. A week later, Harold noticed a young man at Basha's bakery looking longingly at the rolls, but buying nothing. He was thin, perhaps 20 years old, with worn clothes and the look of someone who hadn't eaten in a while. The old Harold would have ignored him. He would have thought, probably a drug addict, or he should get a job. But the new Harold, or perhaps the original Harold he had forgotten how to be, approached him. "Hungry?" he asked simply. The young man startled, clearly embarrassed. "No, I was just looking." Harold didn't argue. He just ordered 2 sandwiches, 2 soups, and 2 coffees. He paid and handed half to the young man. "We all need a hand sometimes." The young man took the food with trembling hands. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you so much. I lost my job 2 months ago. The landlady kicked me out. I'm staying at the shelter, but they only serve dinner and You don't need to explain." Harold interrupted gently. He took $40 from his wallet. "It's not much, but it might help." The young man looked at the money as if it were a fortune. "I can't take this." "Of course you can. Someone did something kind for me recently. I'm just passing it on." Harold pressed the money into the young man's hand. "What's your name?" "David. David Chun." "David, when you're in a better place, pass the kindness on to someone else. That's how it works." Harold started carrying extra cash specifically for these moments. Not much. He lived on a modest retirement himself, but enough to make a difference. He paid for strangers' coffee. He left generous tips. He put extra coins in parking meters about to expire. But it was the non-monetary gestures that truly began to change Harold. He started volunteering at the local food bank twice a week. There, he met other volunteers, people of all ages and backgrounds, all choosing to use their time to help. One of them was Father O'Brien, the priest at the local Catholic church, elderly, probably close to 80, but with the energy of someone decades younger. "First time volunteering?" Father O'Brien asked as they packed groceries together. "Yes," Harold admitted. "Should have started years ago. Better late than never. What brought you here?" Harold told him about the wallet, about Marcus, about how a stranger returned more than just money. Father O'Brien listened intently, nodding. "You know, Harold," the priest said afterward, "there's a proverb I've always loved. The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is now. You're planting now. That's what matters." Harold felt something warm in his chest. Acceptance without judgment. Encouragement without condescension. It was exactly what he needed to hear. In the following weeks, Harold became a regular at the food bank. He met Maria, a Mexican immigrant who worked 3 jobs, but still found time to volunteer. He met James, a Vietnam veteran struggling with PTSD, but finding peace in helping others. He met Susan, a retired teacher who dedicated her mornings to teaching adult literacy. Each person had a story. Each one had faced hardship, and each one chose to respond with kindness instead of bitterness. Harold realized he had wasted years believing he was unique in his suffering, that the world was divided into victims and predators. But the truth was much more complex and beautiful. The world was full of people carrying invisible pain, yet still choosing kindness. One evening, Harold was eating dinner alone when his phone rang. It was an unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. "Mr. Bennett? It's David. David Chun from the bakery." Harold remembered immediately. "David, how are you?" "Better. Much better. I got a job at a warehouse. It's not much, but it's a start. And I got a room in a boarding house. I just called to thank you. Those $40 gave me what I needed to buy decent clothes for interviews. You changed my life." Harold felt tears prick his eyes. "You did the hard work, David. I just gave you a little push." "I want to pass it on," David said. "Like you said, I want to be that person for someone else someday." When he hung up, Harold sat in silence, absorbing the moment. He had made a difference. Small, perhaps, but real. And that mattered more than he could have imagined. 2 months had passed since Marcus returned the wallet, and Harold barely recognized his own life. The house that once felt like a tomb now had sounds of life. The phone ringing, neighbors stopping by for coffee, even occasional laughter. But there was still one wound Harold hadn't dared to touch. His son Michael. 5 years of silence. 5 years since their last explosive fight, when Michael accused him of being cold. distant, incapable of love. Harold responded with anger, saying terrible things about his son's life choices. Michael slammed the door and never came back. Harold had convinced himself it was better that way, that Michael was better off without a bitter father. But now, sitting in his living room with Marcus's letter in his hand, Harold realized the truth. He was afraid. Afraid of rejection. Afraid it was too late. Afraid Michael would never forgive him. Father O'Brien noticed Harold's distraction during their food bank shift. "Something weighing on your mind?" the priest asked gently. Harold hesitated, then decided to trust him. He told him about Michael, about the fight, about the years of silence. Father O'Brien listened without interrupting. "Have you ever thought about calling?" the priest asked when Harold finished. "Every day. But what do I say? Sorry for being a terrible father for 70 years. Father O'Brien smiled. "How about starting with, 'Hi, son. I miss you.'" It seemed too simple. But maybe that was exactly it. Maybe Harold had overcomplicated everything in his life, when the answer was always simple human connection. That night, Harold picked up the phone a dozen times before finally dialing. Each ring felt like an eternity. Then, a familiar but distant voice answered. "Hello." Harold almost hung up. But he thought of Marcus, of David, of all the small acts of courage he had witnessed in the past weeks. "Michael." His voice came out rough. "It's your father." Silence on the other end. Harold could hear breathing, could imagine Michael deciding whether or not to hang up. "Dad," Michael finally said, his voice carefully neutral. "It's surprising to hear from you. I know it's been a long time, and I know I have no right to call after everything. But Michael, I'm sorry." More silence. Then, to Harold's surprise, Michael asked, "Are you okay? Are you sick or something?" "No. I mean, yes, I'm fine. Physically. But Michael, something happened recently that made me realize. I realized I wasted too much time. Too much time being the wrong kind of person. And the biggest loss was you." Harold could hear emotion in his son's breathing. "Dad, you said terrible things the last time we spoke. You said I was a disappointment, that my choices were pathetic, that—" "I know what I said," Harold interrupted, his voice breaking. "And I was wrong. Completely wrong. You are not a disappointment. I am. I was a terrible father, and I let my bitterness poison our relationship. But I'm trying to change. I know it might be too late, but I need you to know I'm sorry. And I love you. I always loved you, even when I didn't know how to show it." He heard Michael sob on the other end. "I've waited years to hear that," Michael said through tears. "Years, Dad. I know, son, and I have no excuse for taking this long. But if you give me a chance, just one, I promise to do better." "How do I know this isn't temporary? How do I know you won't go back to being that cold man when things get tough?" It was a fair question. Harold thought carefully. "I don't know if I can guarantee I'll be perfect, but I can guarantee I'm going to try. And I'm going to keep trying, even when I fail. I recently learned that kindness is a daily choice, not a single event." Michael was quiet for a long moment. "Do you want to get coffee? Maybe next week." Relief flooded Harold. "I'd love that. I would really love that. Thursday. There's a new coffee shop near my work. I'll be there." "Michael, thank you. For answering. For giving me a chance." "Dad," Michael said softly. "You're my father. I always wanted a chance. I just needed you to want it too." When they hung up, Harold sat in his armchair and cried. Not tears of sadness or regret, but of relief. The deepest wound in his life had begun to heal. He picked up Marcus's letter and reread the words he had memorized. "I hope this restores, even if just a little bit, your faith that kindness still exists." Marcus didn't just restore his faith in kindness. He restored his faith in the possibility of starting over, in forgiveness, in love that survives even the worst mistakes. Harold folded the letter carefully and placed it next to the photo of Michael he had always kept on the bedside table, even during the silent years. Two symbols of hope, side by side. The Thursday arrived slower than any day in Harold's memory. He woke up at 5 in the morning, 2 hours earlier than usual, unable to go back to sleep. The coffee with Michael was at 10, but Harold was already dressed and ready by 7. He looked in the mirror and saw a different man than the one from 2 months ago. He was still 70, still had deep wrinkles and white hair, but there was something different in his eyes, a light that had been extinguished for decades. Harold arrived at the coffee shop 15 minutes early and chose a table near the window. His hands trembled slightly as he waited. What if Michael didn't show up? What if he had changed his mind? What if... The door opened and there he was. Michael, at 43, with a few gray threads at his temples, but still the boy Harold taught to ride a bike, who he took to baseball games, who had somehow become a stranger over the years. They looked at each other for a charged moment. Then Michael walked to the table and, to Harold's surprise, hugged him. Not a formal hug, but a real, tight hug that said everything words could not. "Hi, Dad," Michael said when they separated, wiping his eyes discreetly. "Hi, son," Harold replied, his voice thick with emotion. They ordered coffee and for a few minutes sat in uncomfortable silence. So much to say, neither knowing where to start. "You look different," Michael finally said. "I can't explain it, but you seem lighter." Harold smiled. "I feel lighter. I carried a weight for a very long time. I'm finally learning to let go." "What changed? On the phone you mentioned something happened." Harold told the complete story. The lost wallet, the days of despair, the miraculous return, Marcus's letter, and everything that followed. Michael listened in silence, occasionally nodding, his eyes never leaving his father's face. "A stranger returned your wallet, and that changed your whole life," Michael said when Harold finished, not with skepticism, but with astonishment. "It wasn't just the wallet," Harold explained. "It was the letter, his words. Not everyone is like that. Some of us still believe in doing the right thing, even when no one is watching. That broke something in me. Or maybe it fixed it. It made me realize that I spent 70 years letting the worst of humanity define my worldview. I forgot kindness exists because I stopped looking for it." Michael stirred his coffee, thoughtful. "You know, growing up with you was hard. You were always so closed off, so convinced the world was awful. I remember trying to tell you about my day at school, and you'd respond with stories about criminals you arrested. It was like living with a constant storm cloud." Every word hurt, but Harold didn't look away. "You're right. I brought the job home in the most destructive way possible. I let what I saw on the streets infect our home, and you paid the price. When Mom died, I thought maybe you'd soften. Maybe the grief would bring us closer," Michael continued, his voice low. "But you closed off even more. It was like losing both parents." Harold felt tears burn his eyes. "I didn't know how to process losing Dorothy. She was my light. When she was gone, I just shut down. And you needed a father, and I wasn't there. Michael, I'm sorry. There's no excuse, but I'm sorry." Michael wiped his own eyes. "The fight we had, when you said those things about my career choices, about how I wasted my potential by becoming a teacher instead of a lawyer or a doctor." "I was projecting," Harold interrupted. "Projecting my own disappointment with myself onto you. You've done something beautiful with your life. You teach children. You shaped the future. I only kept people locked up. You chose to build. I only knew how to destroy. You didn't only destroy, Dad. You protected people. You risked your life to keep the community safe. That has value. Maybe. But I let the job destroy me. And it almost destroyed you in the process." They were silent, but it was a different silence now. Not uncomfortable, but contemplative. "Dad," Michael finally said, "I'm afraid I have to tell you something. I'm married. I have been for 3 years." Harold felt like he'd been punched in the gut. You're married and you didn't invite me?" "Why would I invite you? We hadn't spoken in 2 years by that point. And frankly, I didn't want your negativity on the happiest day of my life." It hurt, but Harold understood. "You're right. You're absolutely right. But Michael, I would love to meet her, if you'll allow it." Michael hesitated, then pulled out his phone and showed him a picture. A beautiful woman of Asian descent, smiling next to Michael in a clearly wedding photo. "Her name is Linda. She's a nurse. And Dad, there's one more thing." Michael swiped to another photo. A baby. This is Marcus. Our son. Your grandson. He's 18 months old. Harold gasped. A grandson. Named Marcus. The irony was almost too much. You named him Marcus? It's Linda's grandfather's name. But now, hearing your story, it feels like destiny. Harold looked at the photo of the smiling baby and felt something simultaneously break and rebuild in his heart. He had lost so much time. But maybe, just maybe, there was still time to make up for it. Harold looked at the photo of the grandson he never knew and felt the full weight of everything he had lost. 18 months of life. First steps. First words. Precious moments that would never return. Can I meet him? Harold asked, his voice trembling. I know I don't deserve it, but please, Michael. Let me meet my grandson. Michael put the phone away and studied his father for a long moment. Harold could see the internal struggle happening, the desire to protect his family versus the hope that maybe, this time, his father had truly changed. Linda doesn't know about you, Michael finally said. I mean, she knows I have a father, but I told her we didn't have a relationship. She never pressured me for details. Then tell her now. Tell her the truth. That I was a terrible father, but I'm trying to do better. If she decides she doesn't want to meet me, I'll respect it, but give me a chance to try. Michael took a deep breath. I'll talk to her. But Dad, if I allow this, you need to understand, one chance. That's all I'm giving. If you disappoint Marcus, if you bring that negativity near my son, it's over. This time for good. I understand, Harold said firmly. And I accept. One chance is more than I deserve. They continued talking for 2 more hours. Michael spoke about his life, the challenges of teaching in the public school system, the joy of seeing students progress, how he met Linda at the hospital when he took a student who had gotten injured. Harold truly listened, asking questions, genuinely interested, not just waiting for his turn to speak. When they finally said goodbye, Michael hugged his father again. I'll call, he promised. In a few days, after I talked to Linda. Harold went home in a state of hope mixed with fear. Everything depended on Linda now, a woman he had never met, who had no reason to give him a chance, held his future in her hands. 3 days of agony passed. Harold checked his phone constantly, jumped at every ring. Finally, on the evening of the 3rd day, Michael called. Linda wants to meet you, he said without preamble. But she has conditions. Anything, Harold replied immediately. First, you come to dinner at our house. You meet Linda first, before you meet Marcus. If dinner goes well, if she feels you're safe, then you can meet our son. But it has to be at her pace, understood? Completely. Thank you, Michael. Thank you for this chance. Dinner was scheduled for the following Saturday. Harold spent the week in a state of nerves. He bought flowers, changed clothes 3 times before deciding what to wear, arrived 15 minutes early, and stayed in the car until exactly the scheduled time. Michael's house was small but cozy in a working-class neighborhood on the south side of Milwaukee. Harold rang the doorbell with a trembling hand. Linda opened the door. She was smaller than Harold imagined, delicate, but there was a strength in her eyes that assessed Harold completely in seconds. She was a nurse. She was used to reading people quickly. Mr. Bennett, she said politely. Come in. Dinner began formally. Linda asked direct questions about Harold's intentions, about what had changed, why now. Harold answered honestly, not hiding his failures or trying to paint himself better than he was. I was a terrible father, he admitted. I let bitterness consume me. I let my son grow up without the love he deserved. I have no excuses, just deep regret and a commitment to do better. My father-in-law does not need my approval, Linda said calmly, but my son does, and I will not allow anyone, even family, to bring negativity into his life. Nor should you, Harold agreed. Linda, I promise only this. I will be better. Not perfect, but better. And if at any time you feel I'm not up to it, tell me, and I will step away. Marcus's well-being comes first. Something in Linda's face softened. During dinner, Harold told stories from when Michael was a child, the good memories that existed before everything turned sour. Michael laughed, remembering things he had forgotten. I remember that. Michael exclaimed when Harold recounted the time they tried to build a treehouse and almost fell. You held me when I slipped. You saved my life. That was a father's job, Harold said. I should have made more of those moments. I should have built memories instead of walls. After dinner, Linda looked at Michael, some silent communication passing between them. She nodded. Dad, Michael said, would you like to meet your grandson? Harold didn't trust his voice, so he just nodded. Michael left and returned carrying a baby with curious eyes and dark hair. Little Marcus looked at Harold with a serious expression, deciding whether he approved of the stranger. Harold reached out his finger, and the baby grabbed it with surprising strength. In that moment, holding his grandson's hand for the first time, Harold felt all the bitterness, all the pain, all the regret of the past decades finally begin to completely dissolve. Hi, Marcus, he whispered. I'm your grandpa, and I promise to be better for you than I was for your father. The baby smiled, and Harold wept. 6 months had passed since that life-changing dinner. Harold now saw Michael, Linda, and little Marcus every week, usually on Sundays for lunch at their house or his own. The house that was once a silent tomb now echoed with children's laughter and family conversations. Harold took his role as grandfather seriously. He read books on child development, learned lullabies, and bought educational toys. But most importantly, he was present, truly present, not just physically but emotionally. Marcus, now 2 years old, had become deeply attached to his grandfather. He ran to Harold shouting "Grandpa" every time he saw him. That sound, "Grandpa," was the sweetest Harold had ever heard. But Harold didn't stop with just his own family. The transformation that began with Marcus Johnson's letter continued to expand in ever-widening circles. He still volunteered at the food bank twice a week. He had become a mentor to David Chun, the young homeless man he had helped months ago. David now had a stable job and his own apartment, and the two met regularly for coffee. Harold also started something new. After talking with Father O'Brien, he initiated an informal support group for police officers and ex-police officers dealing with trauma, PTSD, and occupational cynicism, all the demons he himself had faced. I spent 30 years seeing the worst of humanity, Harold would say at the meetings. I let it poison me, but I learned that we can choose what to focus on. We can see the darkness or look for the light. Both exist. It's our choice where we look. The group started small, just 3 people, but it grew. Now there were 15 former officers who met every Tuesday, sharing stories, offering support, and relearning to see kindness in a job that often only showed cruelty. One day, Harold received an unexpected call. It was from the local newspaper. Apparently, one of the people Harold had helped wrote a letter to the editor about the elderly man who was returning kindness to Milwaukee, one person at a time. The newspaper wanted to do a story. Harold initially refused. I don't do this for recognition, he said. But Michael convinced him. Dad, think how many people could be inspired. How many other people could start their own journeys of change. The story was published in a Sunday edition. It was small, only half a page, but it told about Harold, the bitter ex-cop who recovered his humanity through a stranger's act of kindness and now dedicated his life to passing it forward. The response was overwhelming. Dozens of people called or wrote, sharing their own stories of transformation, thanking him for the inspiration, and asking how they could help. But the most important call came a week later. Harold answered and heard a familiar but distant voice. Mr. Bennett? It's Marcus. Marcus Johnson. Harold was speechless for a moment. Marcus, I think about you every day. I wanted to thank you personally, but didn't have your number. I read the story in the newspaper, Marcus said, his voice heavy with emotion. I had no idea that one small gesture would create all this. It's incredible, Mr. Bennett. Marcus, you saved my life. Not literally, but in every way that matters. I was ready to give up on everything, and you showed me that kindness still exists. You gave me hope. And you took that hope and you multiplied it, Marcus replied. That's how it's supposed to be. It's a current, not a one-time transaction. I'm proud I was a small part of your journey. They agreed to meet. Coffee at the same Polish bakery, where everything began. When they finally met in person, they hugged like old friends, though they were technically still strangers. "I have something for you," Harold said, handing him an envelope. Inside was a check for $3,000, the exact amount that was in the wallet. "Mr. Bennett, I can't accept this," Marcus protested. "It's not payment," Harold explained. "It's an investment in the work you do, in the kindness you spread. Use it to help someone else. Keep the current going." Marcus accepted with tears in his eyes. "You know I named my grandson after you?" Harold asked. "Michael and Linda named him Marcus because of her grandfather, but also, I found out later, because Michael wanted to honor the man who gave his father back to him." Now it was Marcus's turn to cry. "I just returned a wallet." "No," Harold corrected gently. "You returned so much more than that. You returned my humanity, my family, my purpose. You showed me that it's never too late to change, to choose kindness, to be better." They sat in that bakery for hours, sharing stories, laughing, and planning ways to spread even more kindness throughout the community. When Harold finally walked home that night, he passed Mrs. Kowalski's house. She was at the window and waved. He waved back, smiling. His house was no longer empty. His heart was no longer bitter. At 70, Harold Bennett finally learned what Dorothy tried to teach him throughout their marriage: that love, kindness, and human connection are choices, and it is never too late to make the right choice. He walked into his house, looked at the photos of Michael, Linda, and little Marcus on the wall, and whispered to the universe, "Thank you for a second chance, for hope, for reminding me that people can change." And somewhere, he imagined, both Dorothy and Marcus Johnson's grandfather were smiling. Harold's story teaches us that transformation is never too late, that a single act of kindness can create ripples that change lives, that cynicism and bitterness are not permanent. They are choices we can reverse, and that lost family can be recovered when we finally open our hearts. Today, Harold spends his days spreading the kindness that Marcus returned to him along with that wallet. And little Marcus grows up knowing he was named in honor of two men who believe in goodness. If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel and share this story. What act of kindness changed your life?